Welcome, everybody. I love the topic as we are getting started because NFTs are so new, and yet it's not just for art, it's not just for music or video. Tokenization of digital things, tokenization of things is really expanding into all areas. One of the areas that we do see as we look ahead, not just more and more investment in intellectual property that gives us these signals for NFTs directly, as we were just talking about them, but tokenization of securities. And the real utility behind this, there's a local company, Equity Shift, that has launched a platform for also Ethereum blockchain for tokenization of securities. So it provides liquidity to private investors, right? You can, as long as you're complying with the smart contracts that provide for the trading, then you have the ability to trade, to liquidate, even before there's an acquisition, a change in ownership, or an IPO. So NFTs are not just for art. I'm going to pause there and go back. But let's talk a little bit about what other areas have great collaboration required for impact. We're going to go this afternoon into smart cities infrastructure. There's a range of companies, investors, and solutions that have to coordinate. I mean, of course, in the United States of America and most other countries, it's not like CCP, where it's just the government says and it happens. This is a collaboration between federal, state, local governments across companies that are early stage innovators, large companies, and investment banks. So we'll be getting into the collaboration required for smart cities. We will be talking with EdgeX, a Raleigh-based company that's very active in edge computing. We'll be talking with DGS, a Washington, D.C.-based company that provides for RF monitoring and management of wireless communication spectrum. And we'll be talking with also hardware manufacturers. We're going to be talking about sports and esports, the business of sports. Obviously, that takes a team. And investment. We'll be hearing from venture capital investors. We'll be hearing from some angel and PE. And of course, we have a lot of experts in the room in all of these areas. Well, since it's my conference, I do get to talk, right? And I love to talk. Everyone who knows me knows I love to talk about intellectual property, and more specifically, I love to talk about patents. You know, I'm a recovered engineer. I'm still working on that. But as a patent attorney of almost 23 years, one of the things I've loved about working in patent law is that we're creating assets. We're transforming ideas into assets, right? Are all of them valuable? All patents valuable? It does take a team approach, but most of the time, how many of you have filed patents? Quite a few people have. And how many of you have worked with more than one patent attorney? Right, probably a lot of people have. Everyone is a little different. When I was coming up in patent law, I found that every partner inside one firm did it a little bit differently. And as a recovering engineer, I thought, that doesn't make sense to me. I'd like it to be more systematic. I'd like there to be more data to inform the approaches that we have. And so I kind of brought all of that into bear with software that provided us with the context, the data around what was happening around our ideas and innovation. When we create IP assets at Neo IP here in Durham, we take the team approach. We have usually more than one person working on it. Our team is high tech to biotech, kind of just like this conference and people represented here. But you don't just file. You don't just say, I have something I want to file. That's not creating a valuable asset. And maybe some people have had that experience as well. You need strategy that's informed by data. And you need really good communication if you're going to collaborate with your IP team to create really valuable assets. I said it starts with people. That should be obvious, but there's actually been a lot in the news recently about maybe we don't need people to invent anymore. Now there's such a thing called artificial intelligence, our good friend AI. Can AI invent? possibly, there have been many lawsuits filed in the last year or so where the creators of an AI machine have suggested that their AI has invented. So they filed for patents. And one of the things that they did was mention that the AI machine was the inventor, but their company was the owner. The Patent Office isn't having that because in the US and most other countries, you have to be a person to be an inventor. And in the US, you have to list a person as inventor on the application. Still, the lawsuits are pushing that envelope a little bit. I think it is an interesting question, maybe more so, how many of you have heard of the AI robot Sophia, right? Who is a citizen in Saudi Arabia. That's interesting. So if you are a citizen in one country and then you apply for a patent, if Sophia invents, maybe we're closer to having AI as an inventor in the US. But for now, it's still people, right? It's still people. What are patents? Patents are inventive solutions to problems. So most inventors in companies create or invent because they're solving a problem that the company has, a problem that the market has. Well, how do you assess then if a patent filing for that solution would be valuable? Well, the solution in and of itself may be valuable. The patent may very well not be. How many of you well, maybe I should say, how many of you know someone else who has a patent that's not valuable, right? Actually, most companies don't even know in their own portfolios how many patents they own that they're using in the company for its business. Henry Trusper wrote a book called Open Business Models back in the early 2000s. His research suggested that most companies think they're using about 25%. Nice number, right? Most of them that he interviewed in more detail, 10 to 15% of their patent portfolio that they're actually using as assets to get a return on that investment in the business. In universities, it's typically less than 5%, actually more typically less than 2% of those patents coming out of technology transfer have value, are ever licensed, are ever deployed in the market. So the 5% of all patents being valuable is a number that you'll probably find a lot of places. Why is that? I'll suggest to you it's because most companies and people just file. You have an idea, you think it's inventive, so you file. Our approach is a little bit different, and I'd like to talk you through that. We think that, first of all, as you're kind of beginning to look at data, look at the market. Does anyone else care about your solution, right? The number one way to get a return on your investment in patents is that you enjoy exclusive rights, keeping others out of your space in the market. So let's look at a couple of examples. Does anybody care about your problem? I'll suggest to you a couple of our clients. Cosm Enterprises is represented here. And all of this is public information, folks. Early inventions for Cosm related to demand response. How many of you know demand response in the electric power grid? If you have a smart meter at your house, probably Duke Energy, if you live here, or your power company, has the ability to control your air conditioning settings. How much power you're consuming when it gets really expensive for them to have to buy it in the market if there's not enough, or they will suffer brownout or blackout. I always liked that the problem that Joe Forbes, the inventor in Cosm, identified is that the power grid has a communications problem. He came out of telecommunications and brought some of that wireless two-way communications into the electric power grid. He's continued to invent and evolve and solve problems beyond that. One of them is energy financial settlements. Most of the time when you get your bill, whoever provided the power to the grid has not been paid for it yet. It takes 30 days, 60 days, a lot of times 6 months or more to have your financial settlement. So imagine that's like credit card processing in the 70s. Does anybody remember is it just me? I'm that old, right? The little machines that had the carbon paper, right? Well, now everything is digital, right? It's pretty easy. So he was inspired by that kind of a vision to modernize settlements in the electric power grid. So Cosm Energy COSM exchange for energy financial settlements is like VisaNet, but for the electric power grid. And they're one of our companies that we're featuring here who's fundraising now. So raise your hand, Joe. Awesome. Another example, who cares about the problem? I would like to talk a little bit about crossbar media. Samir Abed is here. He had an initial invention that provided for hearing impaired people to have automated closed captioning from video that was searchable. That sounds like that fills a pretty big need. As he's evolved his invention and his thinking, it's evolved to cover the automated speech-to-text for all video. There's a social media component. All of his patents that I've mentioned are issued and published, and now that he had created the initial platform, he's seeking to monetize those patents. It's another case where, look how big that market is, right? How many of you have ever watched videos that are already speech-to-text and searchable? Seems like the kind of thing maybe Google would want to look into. 6P Color is not here today, but I'd like to talk about them. That is a case of successful spin-out because of patent data. As I said, most universities have less than 2% commercialization, commercial impact for their IP. In this case, technology out of Baylor University in Texas, we started looking at work by scientists and creatives who developed a way to have expanded color gamut. So imagine being able to see more, almost colors between colors. One of the ways that they found the scope of the problem was by working with NASA to realize that when astronauts are outside of our orbit, when they're in space or on the space station, what they see with their eyes, they don't capture with the pictures. The video, the displays can't show it. So they've developed a way to provide for that same view that we have naturally, and now to enhance those videos. The impact there in video gaming, in creative video development, film, even perhaps in printed art, in LED screens, seems pretty large. So their spin-out within less than 2 years provided a return to the university of over 10 million. They didn't just file. There was data context behind that. So I wanted to share those couple of examples. So the reason I talk about this is when you think about patents as business assets, you've got to think about how you'll get a return on that at the time you file, not later. So let's talk about how that happens. Patent Forecast is our software. We think of it more like weather than landscape, if any of you have heard of that. You've seen a couple images here. But we start with the core idea for the invention and then ask, is that patentable? Data answers the question. Actually, as a patent attorney, I've found the number one question I get is, so is it patentable? Well, probably it is, but we have to then ask, as you know it's coming, is it valuable to you? How will you use it in your business? So start with the core idea. I showed these slides earlier, the idea of tokenization, and then apply it to your area, like securities tokenization. The problem that I mentioned Equity Shift is solving is providing liquidity for investors in an automated way, something that's being done manually today. So you stimulate more ideas when you look at patent data. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you read patents today. That's not coming. But this is a way to see very quickly in your space who's investing around you. Valuation of patents typically is done by proximity to other patent owners in a similar area, particularly large companies. Why is that? Patents give you the right to exclude others and keep them out. The larger the company, the more value the patent, because the market that they have exclusivity for, the limited monopoly, if you will, is larger and more valuable. So let's think about it. Besides your idea, now you've looked at data, it looks like it's patentable. What's next? Well, we like to stimulate some alternatives, stimulate ideas. Turns out you can only invent from what you know. But the more you see, the more you know. So How others have solved similar problems will stimulate alternative thinking. That's another way that we use the data. And then you think about, how would somebody design around you, right? Because if you start to monetize by litigation and licensing, someone will try to design around you. So you have to think of that at the time you file, before you're filed, before you're in. And then we think about, where is your competition today? Where are they going? So you can create patent assets that are both offensive and defensive, right? The next thing I would say in creating valuable patents is to tell your story. So it's not just the patent data context, it's your story of your inventive solution to a problem. Talk about the problem. Talk about alternative solutions that have failed, the long-standing, the unmet need. Why now? Why is it working now? That's part of your story, and you have to put that in at filing. So when we think about collaborating to create, we're thinking about the point of view of the inventor, the company, the point of view of the data, the point of view of the neo-IP team. Again, here, let me go to the next slide. Let's think of an example. We have always said the patent data is leading. The investment in patents has to lead market activity. It's just the way the patent laws are. If you file after you've launched and have public use, no patent for you, right? That's just the laws. That's the way it goes. So what does that mean for investors? Well, we use this data to provide for diligence, obviously, when there's a valuation question, patentability clearance, when there's merger and acquisition, but also to identify companies to buy or companies to invest in. We were calling the Fitbit acquisition by Google a year before it happened. Why? We were looking at the position in the marketplace of the investment in patents by Fitbit, where we saw late activity by companies like Google and Apple. Actually, inside our team, we were kind of disagreeing about who was going to get that. Would it be Apple or Google? Well, companies like Google do have a pretty clear track record of acquiring companies that have patents in areas where they're already operating, where they come late. So a lot of times companies build the portfolio, but most of the time large entities buy. They build and buy. It's a little bit of a hybrid. So we have noted that from an investor point of view, that we want to position the portfolio to be attractive to be acquired in the future. Most smaller companies, growth companies, most entrepreneurs will be acquired for the exit rather than IPO. At least that's the story today. So where does that leave us? In order to collaborate across a team, communication is key. Hearing the point of view from every stakeholder, if you will, in that process. Alignment is another key, being sure that the strategy for patents is aligned with the business strategy. And then let's not forget this. It is a race. It is a race to file. The first to file is the winner in the patent game. So you want to race to win with the right assets that will be valuable, that will help you meet your target, the end of the race, the finish, the acquisition. And patent data leads the way.